The clock in the kitchen marked 6:15 in the morning when Lisa began her routine at the Jefferson estate. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the scent of disinfectant as she methodically organized utensils on the granite countertop. Her movements were precise, silent, as if she had learned to occupy as little space as possible in the world. The long sleeves of her uniform hid the marks she didn't want anyone to see, though the heat of the Atlanta summer made the task almost unbearable. Through the kitchen window, she could see the garden still covered by morning mist. The roses that Mrs. Caroline had loved so much were beginning to wither, now that there was no one to care for them with the same dedication. The death of the family patriarch 3 months ago had left the mansion steeped in a different kind of silence than the one Lisa was accustomed to. It was no longer the silence of fear, but of absence. While preparing the breakfast tray, her thoughts drifted to the message she had received the night before. Mark, her ex-husband, continued to find ways to reach her, even after 5 years since the divorce. "You think you can hide forever," the text said, followed by a photo of the mansion's facade. Lisa deleted the message immediately, as she did with all the others, but the feeling of being watched remained, sticky like a second skin. The sound of tires on the property's driveway pulled her from her thoughts. Through the window, she saw a black Audi cross the main gates. The new owner had arrived. Lisa knew only what the real estate agency had informed: Richard Vidal, successful businessman returning to the United States after years abroad. What no one mentioned were the rumors she discovered through internet searches: the mysterious death of his wife, the never fully explained fire, the speculations that still circulated in international newspapers. Lisa discreetly observed as he got out of the car, tall with grey at his temples, a posture that betrayed years of privilege and formal education. There was something in his face that intrigued her, a mixture of weariness and vigilance, as if he were constantly expecting something bad to happen. He passed by the kitchen without noticing her, following the housekeeper who was waiting at the main entrance. The following hours were filled with the bustle of the move. Employees came and went carrying boxes and furniture, while Lisa stayed in her domain in the kitchen, preparing coffee and small snacks when requested. It was late in the afternoon, when most of the employees had already left, that the first real encounter happened. Lisa was in the backyard, collecting dry leaves that accumulated near the pool area. The wind blew harder, causing the sleeve of her uniform to slip. It was just a moment, but enough to reveal the purple marks on her wrist, the result of her last encounter with Mark, when he grabbed her forcefully after following her to the bus stop. "What are those marks?" The deep and controlled voice caught her by surprise. Lisa quickly turned around, finding Richard Vidal standing a few meters away, his eyes fixed on her arm. She pulled the sleeve down in an automatic movement, but it was too late. "It's nothing, sir." The words came out rehearsed, like all the other excuses she had learned to give over the years, but there was something different in the way he observed her. It wasn't pity nor judgment, but a kind of recognition that disconcerted her. "My name is Richard," he said, after a moment of silence, "and bruises like that are never nothing." His eyes met hers briefly before turning to the horizon. Sometimes, the most dangerous ghosts are the ones still alive. The phrase hung in the air between them, loaded with meanings that Lisa wasn't ready to decipher. Richard didn't say anything else, just nodded slightly before leaving her alone with the sound of dry leaves dancing in the wind and a strange feeling in her chest, something between fear and hope, as if a door she didn't even know existed had been suddenly unlocked. That night, lying in her small bed in the back room, Lisa thought about his words. Living ghosts. She knew this type of haunting well. Mark was one of them, always present in the shadows of her life, in the nightmares that woke her up sweating, in the way she still checked twice if the doors were locked. But there was something else now, something new and equally disturbing, the way her heart had raced when Richard looked at her, as if recognizing in him a soul equally marked by secrets. The following days brought a new routine to the mansion. Lisa observed, through the cracks in her self-imposed invisibility, the changes that Richard implemented in the space. The old heavy curtains were replaced by lighter fabrics, allowing natural light to invade the rooms that were always immersed in half-light before. Architects and decorators circulated through the property, discussing transformations that would make the place a luxury refuge for selected guests. But it wasn't just the physical changes that captured her attention. There was something in the way Richard conducted his life that intrigued her more and more. He maintained a rigorous routine, woke up before sunrise, spent hours in his office making calls in different languages, and often walked alone through the gardens at dusk. Lisa noticed that he rarely received personal visits, only professional ones, and there were times when she caught him staring into nothingness, with an expression that she knew well, that of someone carrying an invisible weight. On a particularly hot morning, while Lisa was cleaning the windows of the library, she found a folder that had fallen behind an armchair. As she picked it up, some photos escaped, scattering across the floor. Her heart froze when she recognized a familiar face among them. Mark, a few years younger, shaking hands with businessmen at some social event. And there was Richard, too, in the background of the image, with a tense expression that contradicted the apparently festive atmosphere of the photo. "I see you found something interesting." Richard's voice startled her. Lisa dropped the photos, her hands trembling slightly. "I'm sorry, sir, I was just cleaning and—" Her voice failed when he approached, calmly collecting the photos. "You know him, don't you?" Richard asked, his eyes fixed on the photo where Mark appeared. "Mark Stevens, the man who left those marks on your arms." Lisa felt the blood drain from her face. How did he know? Questions accumulated in her throat, but none managed to escape. "Our paths crossed a few years ago," Richard continued, his voice taking on a deeper tone. "A land negotiation that never materialized. There was something in the way he conducted business that deeply bothered me. Now I'm beginning to understand why." The silence that followed was dense, filled with unspoken words. Lisa realized that her hands were still trembling and hid them in her apron pockets. "Has he been showing up around here?" Richard's question was soft, but there was an intensity in his eyes that made her shiver. "Sometimes he sends messages, drives by the street." Lisa hesitated before continuing. "Yesterday I found this at the door of my room." She took out of her pocket a small object she had been carrying since the previous morning, a delicate pearl necklace that Mark had given her at the beginning of their marriage, and that she believed she had lost years ago. Richard took the necklace, examining it carefully. "This is a threat," he stated, not as a question but as a fact. "He never accepted the divorce," Lisa explained, her voice low. "He says I'm his property, that no one else can have me." "You are no one's property." The firmness in Richard's voice made her look up, meeting his gaze. "And maybe it's time we change that." "What do you mean?" "Stay. Keep working here, but not just as an employee. I need someone who knows Mark, who understands how he thinks. And you need protection, the kind of protection that only someone with resources can offer." The proposal hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken implications. Lisa felt her heart race, not out of fear this time, but something different, a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Why are you doing this?" she finally asked. Richard took a moment before answering, his eyes lost in some distant point. "Let's say I have my own scores to settle with the past, and perhaps by helping you, I can begin to redeem some of my own mistakes." At that moment, something changed between them. It wasn't something that could be named or explained, but Lisa felt it, as if an invisible current had been established, connecting their destinies in a way that neither could foresee. "And if he finds out?" "That's exactly what we want to happen," Richard answered, a determined gleam in his eyes. "Sometimes to defeat a predator, you need to make him come out of his den." Lisa nodded slowly, understanding that she was about to embark on something much bigger than a simple offer of protection. It was a chance to face her demons, to regain control of her own life. And there was something more, something she wasn't yet ready to admit. The way her heart beat differently when Richard was nearby. as if recognizing in him a possibility of a future that she had long given up on dreaming. The arrival of spring brought a subtle change in the atmosphere of the mansion. The roses in the garden, which Lisa now tended with redoubled dedication, began to bloom in shades of red and pink, as if responding to a vital force that was gradually settling in the place. But it wasn't just the flowers that were blooming. Something was also beginning to awaken in Lisa's heart, something she tried without much success to ignore. The mornings now had a different ritual. Richard always appeared in the kitchen before his meetings with the excuse of having an extra coffee. Lisa noticed how he prolonged these moments, asking seemingly casual questions about her day, her likes, her life. They were simple conversations, but loaded with a growing intimacy that scared and attracted her in equal measure. "Do you like literature?" he asked on one of these mornings, observing her organize the pantry. Lisa hesitated before answering. "I used to read a lot before everything." "Before him," Richard completed, understanding the unsaid. "Mark didn't approve. He said they were a waste of time, that they filled my head with ideas." She shrugged, trying to disguise the weight of those memories. "I ended up leaving the books behind when I left home." That same afternoon, Lisa found a key on her bed, with a note written in Richard's elegant handwriting. "Library, third shelf to the right. They're yours now." When she opened the indicated cabinet, she found a complete collection of literary classics, some in rare editions. Her hands trembled as she touched the spines of the books, feeling the soft leather under her fingers. It was more than a gift. It was a silent declaration that he saw her beyond her function in the house, beyond her past. The following weeks brought an unplanned routine. After dinner, when the house quieted down, Lisa allowed herself a few hours in the library. Sometimes Richard was there, working on his laptop or just contemplating the night through the French windows. They didn't talk much in these moments, but there was a mutual comfort in their silent presence. It was on one of these nights that the storm arrived. Lightning cut the sky at increasingly shorter intervals, until a particularly strong thunder caused the power to fail. Lisa was in the middle of a chapter when darkness took over the environment. "Don't move," Richard's voice sounded close. She heard his confident steps in the darkness, and soon the environment was gently illuminated by the light of candles that he methodically lit. The scenery was completely transformed. The library, previously formal and imposing, gained an almost magical atmosphere under the flickering light. Shadows danced on the walls, and Lisa felt transported into one of the novels she was reading. "Better?" Richard asked, sitting in the armchair opposite to hers. The candlelight created interesting shadows on his face, softening his normally controlled features. "Yes, thank you." Lisa tried to focus on the book in her lap, but it was impossible to ignore the intensity with which he observed her. "Which book did you choose tonight?" "Jane Eyre," she replied, a slight blush tinging her cheeks. "I had read it before, but each time I find something new." "A story about a woman who finds her own strength through adversity," Richard commented, a half-smile on his lips. "Seems appropriate." The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. There was a tension in the air, an electricity that didn't just come from the storm outside. Lisa could feel Richard's gaze on her, like a ghost touch on her skin. "Sometimes I wonder," he began, his voice lower than normal, "if you have any idea how extraordinary you are." The words hit her like an electric shock. Lisa raised her eyes, meeting his across the dim light. "I'm not extraordinary," she protested softly. "I'm just a survivor." "And isn't that extraordinary in itself?" Richard leaned slightly forward. "Surviving with dignity, keeping your essence intact after everything you've been through." Lisa felt her breath falter. His proximity, the intimacy of the moment, the way the words seemed to caress her soul, all of this left her vulnerable in a way she hadn't experienced in years. It was at this moment that a new lightning illuminated the library, and through the window, Lisa saw a familiar silhouette in the garden. Her entire body froze. "Mark," she whispered, the familiar fear beginning to settle in her chest. Richard stood up in a fluid movement, approaching the window. But when he looked, The figure had already disappeared into the darkness of the night. "He won't touch you," Richard stated, his voice carrying a silent promise. "Not while I'm here." Lisa wanted to believe him. More than that, she wanted to allow herself to feel all the whirlwind of emotions that this man awakened in her. But fear was an old acquaintance, a faithful companion that didn't let her lower her guard so easily. Still, when Richard approached and gently touched her face, wiping away a tear she hadn't even realized she had shed, Lisa didn't move away. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to be touched without fear, without shrinking, without expecting the pain that always came after. The scent of lavender permeated the morning air as Lisa organized the freshly laundered clothes. It was a ritual she had always maintained, sorting, folding, storing, but today her thoughts were distant, reliving the events of the previous night in the library. Richard's gentle touch on her face still burned in her memory, like an invisible mark that she didn't know if she wanted to erase. The sound of a familiar horn brought her back to reality. Her body reacted instinctively, shrinking as she recognized Mark's black car parked across the street. He didn't get out of the vehicle, just stayed there, engine running, eyes fixed on the mansion. Lisa knew it was a message. He was watching, waiting, planning. How long? "Has he been doing this?" Richard's voice sounded behind her, making her start. "Since you arrived," Lisa replied, quickly correcting herself. Formality was a protection, a way to keep distance from the emotions that threatened to overflow. Richard approached. The window, his reflection overlapping with the image of the car on the street. "He's becoming bolder. We need to be careful." The use of "we" didn't go unnoticed by Lisa. It was strange how a simple word could carry so much meaning, so much promise of protection. "I received this morning," she said, handing him a crumpled envelope. Inside a single photo, Lisa and Richard in the library the previous night, captured through the window at the exact moment he touched her face. Richard's eyes darkened as he examined the image. "He wants to provoke us. He wants us to know he's watching." "I'm afraid of what he might do," Lisa confessed, her voice almost a whisper. "Mark was always unpredictable when contradicted." "Tell me about it," Richard asked softly, guiding her to the chairs on the back porch. "I need to understand who we're dealing with." Lisa hesitated, her hands nervously intertwining in her lap. It was difficult to talk about those years, about how she had been young and naive when she met Mark, about how he gradually isolated her from friends and family, about how the first signs of violence were subtle, a push here, a shout there, always followed by expensive gifts and apologies. "The worst part wasn't the blows," she continued, her voice gaining strength as the words flowed. "It was the aftermath. The way he made me feel it was my fault, as if I had provoked it all, as if I deserved it." Richard listened in silence, his eyes fixed on her, absorbing every word. There was something in his posture that conveyed more than sympathy. It was as if he truly understood the weight of those memories. "My wife," he began after a long moment. "Alexandra was different from Mark in many aspects, but similar in others. She didn't use her fists. She used words, manipulation, mind games. The fire that killed her. Sometimes I wonder if it was really an accident." The E. Confession hung in the air between them, heavy as a storm cloud. Lisa realized it was the first time he had spoken openly about his deceased wife. "You think she—" Lisa couldn't complete the sentence. "That she caused the fire?" "Yes." Alexandra had a special talent for chaos, for creating situations that made me look like the villain. That night we had discussed divorce. She swore she would destroy me, that no one would believe my version. And they didn't believe it? The investigation was inconclusive, but the looks, the whispers, the speculation in the press, it was like being tried and convicted without the right to a defense. That's why I came to America. I needed to start over in a place where no one knew my story. Lisa felt a wave of empathy so strong it almost choked her. They were more alike than she had imagined. Two survivors carrying invisible scars, two fugitives trying to rebuild their lives. "But now Mark knows who you are," she said. Concern, evident in her voice. "Let him know," Richard replied, a determined gleam in his eyes. "Maybe that's exactly what we need to end this once and for all." At that moment, as if responding to an invisible cue, Lisa's cell phone vibrated with a message. It was an unknown number, but the content was unmistakably from Mark. "You always had a peculiar taste in men, Lisa. First me, now a suspicious widower. But does he know about your sister? About what you did to her?" The blood froze in Lisa's veins. Sarah. The name she had tried so hard to forget, the guilt she carried like an invisible anchor. How did Mark know about this? "What is it?" Richard asked, noticing her paleness. "Nothing," she lied, quickly putting away the cell phone. Some truths were too heavy to be shared, even with someone who was beginning to mean so much. Just another of his empty threats. But as she said this, Lisa knew that nothing coming from Mark was really empty. And now, with the mention of Sarah, the game had completely changed. It wasn't just about her and her past with Mark anymore. It was about much deeper, much more painful secrets. The unexpected arrival of Sarah was like an earthquake that shook the already fragile structures of Lisa's life. She was organizing the garden flowers when she saw the elegant and determined figure cross the gates of the mansion. For a moment, she thought she was having a hallucination. Her younger sister, whom she hadn't seen in 15 years, was now standing a few meters from her, her green eyes identical to hers, sparkling with a mixture of anger and recognition. "So this is where you hide," Sarah said, her voice carrying the weight of years of resentment. The great Lisa, always so concerned with keeping up appearances that she was capable of abandoning her own sister in an orphanage. Lisa felt her legs weaken. The gardening scissors slipped from her hands, falling silently onto the grass. "Sarah, how did you find me?" "Mark was very helpful in providing your address." Sarah's smile was as sharp as a razor. "Who would have thought that that monster you called a husband would be the bridge to our reunion?" The mention of Mark made Lisa's stomach churn. Of course it had been him. Another piece in his manipulation game, another way to make her suffer. "It's not what you think," Lisa began, her voice trembling. "I never wanted to leave you. "Spare me your excuses," Sarah interrupted her, advancing a step. "Do you know how long it took me to discover the truth? To understand that my own sister abandoned me because it was more convenient to start a new life without the burden of a child to raise?" "You don't understand," Lisa whispered, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Mark, he threatened to kill us. He said that if I didn't marry him, if I didn't leave you at the orphanage, he would kill us both. I was young, I was scared. And that justifies 15 years of silence?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "Look at you now, living in this mansion, serving coffee to the rich while I grew up alone, convinced I had been abandoned because I wasn't worthy of love." The sound of footsteps on the porch interrupted the confrontation. Richard emerged from the shadows of the house, his face a mask of controlled concern. "Is everything all right here?" Sarah examined him with clinical interest. "Ah, the famous Richard Vidal. Mark told me about you, too. The mysterious widower with a nebulous past. It seems my sister has a specific type of man in her life." "Sarah, please," Lisa pleaded, taking a step towards her sister. "We can talk about this in private. There's so much you need to know." "Like what?" "How you slept peacefully at night knowing your 12-year-old sister was alone in an orphanage. Or maybe about how you plan to keep this secret forever." Richard moved subtly, positioning himself between the two sisters. "I suggest we continue this conversation inside the house. Some matters are too delicate to be discussed in the open air." Sarah stared at him for a long moment before nodding. "Why not? I'm curious to hear what story Lisa invented for you about her past. I'm sure it will be fascinating." As they headed inside the mansion, Lisa felt the weight of 15 years of secrets and guilt threatening to crush her. The look Richard gave her was loaded with unasked questions, with a trust she feared she was about to destroy. In the library, Sarah sat with the rigid posture of someone preparing for battle. "You know what's ironic? While you were here, living your life of servitude to the rich, I became a lawyer. specialized in the rights of women and abandoned children. Each case I take, each child I help, is a way to process what you did to me." Lisa closed her eyes, finally letting the tears flow freely. "You have every right to hate me, but you need to know the whole truth about that night, about the threats, about how Mark planned everything from the beginning." "The truth?" Sarah leaned forward, her eyes shining with a feverish intensity. "The truth is that you chose a violent man over your own sister. The truth is that you abandoned me to save your own skin. And now, years later, here you are, repeating the pattern with another man of dubious past." Richard, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke. "Sometimes the choices we make under threat are not really choices. They are survival." "Oh, don't come at me with that cheap philosophy," Sarah retorted. "You don't even know her for real. You don't know what she's capable of." "Perhaps not," Richard agreed softly. "But I recognize the signs of someone who has carried too heavy a weight alone for too long." His words hit Lisa like a punch to the stomach. It was true. She had carried the weight of guilt, fear, and secrets for so long that she could barely remember what it was like to live without them. Night fell over the mansion like a heavy cloak, bringing with it a disquieting stillness. After hours of emotional confrontation in the library, Sarah had left, leaving behind a trail of accusations and a hotel address scribbled on a piece of paper. Lisa remained seated in the same armchair, her body exhausted, but her mind in constant turmoil. Richard had not left her side during the entire conversation, his silent presence serving as an anchor amid the emotional storm. Now he served 2 glasses of red wine, handing one to Lisa with a gentle gesture. "You must think I'm horrible," she murmured, her fingers absently tracing the edge of the glass. "Actually," Richard replied, sitting in the opposite armchair, "I'm thinking about how appearances can be deceiving, how we judge others' actions without knowing the complete context of their choices." Lisa took a sip of the wine, letting the liquid warm her interior that had been frozen by fear and guilt. "I was 19 when I met Mark. Sarah was 12. Our parents had died recently in a car accident, and I was desperate trying to keep us together, working 3 different jobs." She paused, the memories of that time returning with painful clarity. Mark appeared as a savior, rich, charming, promising to take care of both of us, but soon I realized something was wrong. He began to make comments about Sarah, about how she was becoming beautiful, about how she needed to be disciplined. Richard visibly tensed, his fingers gripping the glass tighter. He threatened Sarah. Not directly at first. It was always innuendo, looks. Until the night I caught him in her room, sitting on the edge of the bed watching her sleep. Lisa shuddered at the memory. When I confronted him, he showed his true face. He said that if I didn't marry him, if I didn't do exactly what he wanted, Sarah would suffer the consequences. "So you sent her to the orphanage to protect her," Richard concluded softly. "It was the only place where I thought she would be safe from him. But Mark made me promise I would never look for her again, that I would cut all contact. He said he had people watching, that he would know if I tried anything." The tears began to fall again. "I chose to abandon her to save her. But Sarah will never know that. She grew up believing I simply didn't love her enough." Richard stood up, crossing the space between them, to kneel before Lisa. "You need to tell her the whole truth." "What if she doesn't believe me? What if Mark—" "Mark no longer has power over you," Richard interrupted firmly. "Not here, not with me." It was at this moment that Lisa's cell phone vibrated with a message. Her face paled as she read the content. "What is it?" Richard asked, noticing her. Change of expression. With trembling hands, she showed him the cell phone screen, a photo of Sarah entering her hotel, followed by the words, "It would be a shame if history repeated itself, wouldn't it?" "Son of a bitch," Richard muttered, his voice loaded with controlled anger. "He's watching every move." "I need to go to her." Lisa stood up abruptly. "I can't let him hurt her. Not again." "Not alone," Richard declared, already grabbing the car keys. "The time for facing Mark in the shadows is over. It's time to bring him into the light." As they rushed to the car, Lisa felt a contradictory mixture of fear and determination. The same fear that had paralyzed her for years was now transforming into fuel for action. And having Richard by her side, solid and determined, made her feel, for the first time in a long time, truly strong. On the way to the hotel, between the city lights that passed like blurs through the window, Lisa allowed herself a moment of reflection. How had her life changed so much in such a short time? How had this man, who carried his own ghosts, become so fundamental in her journey to liberation? "He won't hurt her," Richard said, as if reading her thoughts. "Not this time." Lisa nodded, her hand finding his on the car's gear shift. The touch was electric, loaded with unspoken promises and a trust that grew with each moment. It was strange how, amid chaos and fear, she could feel this connection strengthening, as if each obstacle they faced together brought them closer. The hotel where Sarah was staying was a modern building in the center of the city, its glass windows reflecting the nightlights of Atlanta. When Lisa and Richard arrived at the lobby, the clock marked almost midnight. The receptionist, a young man with a sleepy appearance, informed that Sarah had left about an hour before, accompanied by a man. "What did he look like?" Lisa asked, her heart accelerating with the familiar fear. Tall, well-dressed, graying hair at the temples, the receptionist began to describe, but Lisa was no longer listening. She knew that description all too well. "Mark," she whispered, feeling her legs weaken. Richard held her by the elbow, keeping her steady. "Where did they go?" Richard asked, his voice assuming an authoritative tone that made the receptionist straighten in his chair. "I heard something about Antigua Cafe, that historic restaurant downtown. The man seemed quite insistent on taking the lady there." Lisa knew the place. It was where Mark had taken her on their first date so many years ago, an elegant establishment with marble tables and crystal chandeliers frequented by Atlanta's elite, the type of environment where he always felt in control. On the way to the cafe, Lisa couldn't stop thinking about how Mark had planned all this. Using Sarah wasn't just another way to get to her, it was a calculated demonstration of power, a way to prove that he could still manipulate the pieces of the game according to his will. "He's going to tell his version to Sarah," Lisa said, her voice trembling slightly. "He's going to distort everything, make her hate me even more." "Or maybe that's exactly what we need," Richard replied, his eyes fixed on the road. "Mark always felt safer when he believed he was in control. That's when he makes mistakes." Antigua. Cafe still had its lights on, one of the few establishments still operating at that hour. Through the old windows, Lisa could see Mark and Sarah sitting at a table in the back. He was gesturing animatedly, his face assuming that expression of sincere concern that she knew so well, the same he used after hurting her when he asked for forgiveness. "Let me go in first," Lisa asked Richard. "I need to do this alone." "There." "Is no more alone, Lisa," he replied, his hand finding hers. "Not after everything." His touch sent a wave of warmth through her body, a mixture of comfort and strength that she had never experienced before. It was different from anything she had ever felt with Mark. There was no fear, no submission. There was partnership. When they entered the cafe, Mark looked up with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ah, what a pleasant coincidence. I was just telling your sister about the old times." Sarah turned, her green eyes wide with surprise and something else. Confusion, perhaps, or the beginning of an understanding. "Enough games, Mark," Lisa said, her voice firmer than it had ever been in his presence. "Sarah deserves to know the truth, all of it." "Truth?" Mark laughed, but there was a tension in his shoulders that Lisa recognized. It was the same kind of tension that preceded his moments of violence. "What truth would that be, dear? The one you invented to make yourself the victim?" "The truth about that night," Lisa replied, sitting at the table. Richard remained standing, a protective presence behind her. "About how you went into her room, about your threats." Sarah looked quickly between the two, her expression changing. "What is she talking about, Mark?" "Don't be ridiculous, Lisa," Mark said, his voice taking on that dangerously soft tone. "You always had a very fertile imagination. That's why you needed discipline." "Discipline?" Richard intervened, his voice laden with contempt. "Is that What you call assaulting a woman? Mark stood up abruptly, his hands closing into fists. This is none of your business, Vidal. Or should I mention the convenient fire that killed your wife? Mention it, Richard responded calmly. Unlike you, I have nothing to hide. It was at this moment that Sarah pulled something from her purse, a small recorder. I think I've heard enough, she said, her eyes fixed on Mark. When you approached me with that story about Lisa, something didn't seem right. Years of experience with domestic violence cases have taught me to recognize certain patterns. Mark's face paled slightly. What are you talking about? I'm talking about how you calculatingly used me to get to my sister. About how every word of this conversation is recorded. About how you just implicitly admitted that you disciplined Lisa. Lisa felt tears beginning to form in her eyes, but this time they were different. They were tears of relief, of hope. Sarah hadn't believed him. Sarah had seen through his manipulation. You have no proof of anything, Mark hissed, but his face had lost all color. No? Sarah smiled, a sharp smile that very much resembled Lisa's. 15 years of experience as a lawyer taught me to always have proof. And you, Mark, just gave me all I needed. The dawn found Lisa and Sarah sitting on the mansion's porch, their coffee cups cooling, while 15 years of silence were finally broken. Richard had given them privacy, understanding that some wounds needed to be healed away from outside. Eyes. Why did you never try to find me after? Sarah asked, her voice softer now, stripped of the initial anger. When you freed yourself from him, when you got the divorce. Lisa wrapped her hands around the cup, seeking warmth. Shame, I think. Guilt. How to explain to you that I had chosen the hardest path thinking it was the only way to protect you. And then time kept passing, and the silence became too big to be broken. I used to make up stories, Sarah confessed, a sad smile playing on her lips. About you being a secret agent, or being on some important mission that prevented you from coming for me. Anything was better than believing you simply didn't want me. The words hit Lisa like arrows, each finding a sensitive point in her heart. I never stopped. Thinking about you, each birthday, each Christmas, I kept presents in a box, imagining how you would be if you were happy, safe. The box still exists. Lisa nodded, standing up. Come with me. In the small back room, Lisa pulled from under the bed a worn shoebox. Inside, organized by date, were small packages, never-sent cards, newspaper clippings about cases Sarah had defended as a lawyer. You followed my career, Sarah asked, her voice choked as she picked up a clipping. About her first big victory in a human rights case. From afar. It was the most I dared to do. Mark still had contacts at the orphanage, people who watched me. He made sure I knew that. Sarah picked up a small package marked with the date of her 18th birthday. Inside was a delicate necklace with a book-shaped pendant, a reference to the stories Lisa used to read to her before bed. You remembered, Sarah whispered, tears flowing freely down her face. Every detail, Lisa replied, her own voice trembling. Every story, every moment. You were all I had, Sarah. Leaving you was like tearing out a piece of my soul. The sisters embraced, years of pain and absence dissolving in shared tears. Outside the room, Richard discreetly observed the scene, his own heart tight with the intensity of the moment. Later, when Sarah had left with the promise to return the next day, Lisa found Richard in the library. He was on the phone, his voice laden with contained urgency. Yes, I need those documents as soon as possible, he was saying. Anything related to the fire, any evidence that might have been overlooked. Lisa waited for him to end the call before approaching. What's happening? Mark messed with the wrong past, Richard replied, his eyes meeting hers. While he was trying to use my history to discredit me, he ended up giving me an important clue. The lawyer who defended my wife in the divorce process was his partner. What does that mean? It means that maybe the fire wasn't as accidental as it seemed, and if there's a connection. Richard stopped, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. Lisa, I need to tell you something. Something I discovered today. She sat down, feeling she was about to hear something that would change everything again. What is it? Alexandra, my wife, and she knew Mark. I found old photos, documents. They didn't just know each other. They had some kind of relationship before she met me. And the fire happened exactly when I started investigating some irregularities in her companies. Lisa felt a shiver run down her spine. You think that... I think none of this is a coincidence. Mark appearing in your life, me getting close to you. Maybe he's been watching me all this time, waiting for the right moment to act. The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with implications. Lisa approached Richard, touching his face gently. Why are you telling me this now? Because I need you to know what you're getting into. What started as a story of protection and redemption could turn into something much more dangerous. And, he hesitated, his eyes fixed on hers. I couldn't bear if something happened to you because of me. Nothing is going to happen to me, Lisa replied, her voice firm. Not now that I've finally found my strength. Not now that I have you. The discovery of the connection between Mark and Alexandra triggered a series of events that no one could have predicted. Sarah, using her contacts in the legal environment, began to unearth information that had been carefully buried over the years. Each new document revealed a web of conspiracy more complex than they had imagined. Lisa was in the kitchen, preparing tea, when Sarah burst through the back door, her heels echoing on the marble floor. Her face was pale, and her hands trembled slightly as she held a folder of documents. You need to see this, she said, spreading papers across the table. Mark wasn't just a violent businessman, he was part of a much larger scheme, and Alexandra, she was about to expose everything. Richard, who had come down upon hearing the commotion, picked up one of the documents. It was a letter, dated 3 days before the fire that killed his wife. In it, Alexandra detailed a series of suspicious transactions, names of shell companies, and a money laundering scheme that involved powerful figures in the business world. She wasn't just unstable, Richard murmured, his voice laden with a painful revelation. She was gathering evidence. The divorce, the threats, it was all a facade to investigate more closely. And Mark, Lisa asked, her heart beating rapidly. What was his role in all this? Sarah pulled another document from the folder. He was the executor. When someone threatened to expose the scheme, Mark was sent to solve the problem. First with threats, then... She didn't need to complete the sentence. Lisa felt her legs weaken, needing to lean on the kitchen countertop. How many other women had gone through the same as her? How many lives had Mark destroyed in service of this obscure scheme? There's more, Sarah continued, her voice trembling slightly. Remember that social worker from the orphanage? The one who insisted you couldn't have contact with me? She worked for them. The orphanage was used as a front for operations of... Enough, Lisa interrupted, unable to hear more. The idea that Sarah could have been a victim of something much worse than abandonment made her stomach turn. Richard approached Lisa, his hands finding her shoulders in a silent gesture of support. We need to take this to the police. It's not that simple, Sarah replied, running her hand through her hair in a gesture of frustration. These people have powerful connections. Alexandra discovered that in the worst possible way. Then what do you suggest? Richard asked, although his tone suggested he already knew the answer. We need to gather more evidence, concrete proof, that can't be ignored or buried. And, Sarah hesitated, looking at Lisa, we need to use Mark's obsessive interest in you. Lisa felt a shiver run down her spine. What do you mean? He still wants you back. This fixation, it's his greatest weakness. If we could use that... No, Richard interrupted firmly. It's too dangerous. More dangerous than leaving him free to do this to other women? Lisa asked softly. More dangerous than living the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders? The silence that followed was heavy, laden with concern and fear. Richard pulled Lisa close, his arms wrapping around her protectively. If something happens to you... Nothing is going to happen, she replied, raising her face to look at him. Not now that I'm no longer alone. Not now that I finally understand what we're fighting against. Sarah observed the interaction of the two with a mixture of concern and admiration. It was evident how much they cared for each other. how their bodies seemed to naturally gravitate towards each other, how their gazes carried silent promises of protection and love. "I have a plan," Sarah finally said, "but it will require all of us to play our roles perfectly. One single mistake." "What's the plan?" Lisa asked, still in Richard's arms. "Mark has always been vain, always needed to feel in control. Let's give him exactly what he wants, a chance to regain that control, and when he lowers his guard—" The sound of a car parking abruptly outside interrupted the explanation. Through the kitchen window, they saw Mark emerge from his black Mercedes, his face contorted in a mask of fury that Lisa knew all too well. "He must have discovered about the recording," Sarah whispered, her hand instinctively searching for the recorder in her purse. "Too late for elaborate plans," Richard said, positioning himself between the sisters and the door. "Time for confrontation." The kitchen door opened violently, hitting against the wall with a crash that made Lisa instinctively shrink. Mark entered like a contained storm, his eyes sweeping the environment until finding the trio. For a moment no one moved. It was as if time had frozen in a tense photograph of a crucial moment. "What a lovely scene," Mark said, his voice distilling sarcasm. "The family reunited. Only Alexandra is missing to complete the picture, isn't that right, Richard?" "You have no right to speak her name," Richard replied, his voice controlled but loaded with threat. Mark laughed, a humorless sound that Lisa knew all too well. It was the same laugh that preceded his worst moments of violence. "Right? I have all the rights, especially after the little show you put on at the cafe." Sarah took a step forward, the recorder firmly held in her hand. "It's over, Mark. We have everything recorded. Your threats, your veiled admissions—" "Ah, little Sarah," Mark interrupted her, his smile widening in a predatory way. "Always so brave, so determined to fight against monsters. But you never asked yourself why I chose precisely that orphanage to leave you." Lisa felt her blood freeze. "What are you talking about? Your little sister wasn't the only special child in that place. We had a very lucrative arrangement with the administration. Children without family, without anyone to ask questions. Our valuable merchandise in the right market." Sarah visibly paled, her hands beginning to tremble. You trafficked children." "I facilitated transactions. Business is business, after all." Mark took a step in their direction, but Richard moved quickly, blocking his advance. "And you, my dear Lisa, were perfect, young, desperate, so easy to manipulate. Just a few threats, and you practically handed over your sister on a silver platter." Lisa felt something break inside her, not out of fear or guilt, but out of a deep and old anger that finally found its way to the surface. "You're sick," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "A monster who feeds on the fear of others." "Be careful with your words, dear," Mark hissed, his mask of civility beginning to crack. "You know what I'm capable of." "Yes, I know," Lisa replied, taking a step forward despite Richard's protective arm. "I know that you're a coward who only has power over others through fear. I know that you kill women who threaten to expose your crimes, as you did with Alexandra." The mention of the name seemed to hit Mark like a slap. His face contorted in an expression of pure fury. Alexandra was a meddling bitch who didn't know her place, just as you're becoming. "Was it you who set fire to her house?" Richard asked, his voice loaded with contained anger. "Was it you who murdered her?" Mark smiled, a cold and calculating smile. "Proving something like that would be complicated, especially considering that all the evidence points to a negligent husband with a questionable history." "Except for the letter," Sarah intervened, pulling an envelope from her folder. "The letter that Alexandra sent to your law office 3 days before dying, detailing the entire scheme. The letter that you kept as insurance, isn't that right?" Mark's smile faltered for a moment. "Impossible. That letter was destroyed." "Copies exist," Sarah continued, her confidence growing. "And now we have your recorded confession about child trafficking. It's over, Mark." It was as if something snapped inside him. In a quick movement, Mark pulled a gun from his jacket, pointing it directly at Lisa. "Nothing is over. If I can't have you, no one else will." What happened next was like a scene in slow motion. Richard moved to protect Lisa at the exact moment that Sarah discreetly pressed a button on her cell phone. The sound of sirens began to echo in the distance, approaching rapidly. "You really think I would come unprepared?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly but determined. "The police are on their way, and not the police you bought, a federal task force that has been investigating the case for months." Mark looked around frantically like a cornered animal. His finger tensed on the trigger, but before he could press it, Lisa did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She advanced. "Shoot," she said, her voice calm and firm. "Show everyone who you really are, but know that I'm not afraid of you anymore. Never again." The sound of sirens was closer now, and red and blue lights began to illuminate the kitchen. Windows. Mark looked at the gun in his hand, then at Lisa, and there was something in his eyes, no longer anger or control, but fear. For the first time, it was he who was losing control of the situation. The sound of doors being broken down echoed through the mansion, followed by heavy footsteps and authoritative voices. Mark, still wielding the gun, took a few steps back, his eyes darting between Lisa, Richard, and the multiple entrances to the kitchen. The siege was closing in, and for the first time in his life, he didn't have a planned escape route. "It's over," Lisa repeated, her voice carrying a strength that she never knew she possessed. "All your crimes, all your lies, everything is going to come to light now." "You don't understand," Mark growled, sweat beginning to trickle down his forehead. "These aren't just my crimes. There are powerful people involved, people who won't allow this to happen." "Like they didn't allow Alexandra to speak?" Richard asked, his voice cutting. "Killing her didn't silence the truth. It only delayed it." Group of federal police officers invaded the kitchen at that moment, weapons in hand. "Freeze, drop the weapon." Mark looked one last time at Lisa, and she saw something in his eyes that she had never seen before. Defeat. The gun fell from his hand with a dull thud on the marble floor, and the next moment he was being immobilized and handcuffed. Sarah approached, her recorder still in hand. "Mark Stevens, you're being arrested not only for threat and domestic violence, but for involvement in a human trafficking network, money laundering, and—" She made a dramatic pause. "The murder of Alexandra Vidal." As the police led Mark out, an agent approached the trio. "Dr. Sarah, your informants were right. We just arrested 3 members of the orphanage board and are on our way to 6 more. Arrests of executives linked to the scheme." Lisa looked at her sister with surprise. "You planned all this?" Sarah smiled, though her eyes were teary. "I've been investigating this case for years, without knowing it was connected to you. When Mark approached me, thinking he could use me against you, he had no idea he was delivering the last piece we needed." Richard wrapped Lisa in his arms, and she finally allowed the tears to come, not of fear or sadness, but of relief and liberation. "Is it really over?" she asked against his chest. "It's over," he confirmed, gently kissing her forehead. "You're free." The E. Following hours were a whirlwind of testimonies, documentation, and legal procedures. Lisa watched half-dazed as her kitchen transformed into a kind of temporary operations center. Agents came and went, collecting evidence, photographing documents, building the foundation of what would be one of the largest cases of corruption and human trafficking ever discovered in the country. It was almost dawn when the last police car left the property. Lisa, Richard, and Sarah remained on the porch, observing the sky that was beginning to lighten on the horizon. The silence between them was comfortable, laden with exhaustion and achievement. "What happens now?" Lisa asked, her voice soft in the quietness of the morning. Sarah took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Now we begin to rebuild. There are other children, other families who need to know the truth, who need closure like we needed." "And us?" Lisa looked at Richard, her heart accelerating with the intensity of the look she found. "We live," he answered simply, pulling her closer. "Without fear, without guilt, without ghosts from the past." Sarah observed the interaction of the two with a knowing smile. "You know, Lisa, when I was little and you read stories to me, I always found it strange how princesses needed to be saved by princes. But now I understand that the best stories are those in which people save each other. Lisa felt the tears return to her eyes, but this time they were different. They were tears of hope, of possibilities, of a future that finally seemed bright and attainable. "I need to go," Sarah announced, standing up. "There's a lot of work ahead, many lives to rebuild." "Will you come back?" Lisa asked, a trace of anxiety in her voice. "Always," Sarah promised, hugging her sister tightly. "I won't miss any more moments with you." When Sarah left, Lisa and Richard remained on the porch, watching the sun rise completely. Her hand found his fingers intertwining naturally, as if they had been made for this. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noticing her distant look. "About how strange life is," she replied, turning to face him. "About how sometimes we need to go through hell to find heaven." Richard pulled her closer, his eyes fixed on hers. "Lisa," he began, his voice laden with emotion. But she interrupted him with a kiss, her first true kiss, free of fears and bonds from the past. It was a kiss of promise, of new beginning, of a love that had grown in the shadows, but now could finally flourish in the light. The months that followed brought profound changes not only in Lisa's life, but in the entire structure of the Jefferson estate, now officially transformed into the New Beginning Project, a shelter and support center for women and children victims of violence. The idea had emerged on a night of shared insomnia, when Lisa and Richard were talking about how to give a greater purpose to all the suffering they had faced. Sarah, with her legal experience, became a fundamental piece in the project, coordinating the legal part and establishing partnerships with human rights organizations. Lisa, who knew so well the invisible marks of violence, naturally assumed the role of counselor, using her own story of overcoming to inspire other women to find their inner strength. On a particularly busy afternoon, Lisa was organizing the ERI rooms of the new shelter when she found an old photo of her with Mark, hidden between the pages of a forgotten book. The image caught her by surprise, not by the fear she used to feel, but by the strangeness of seeing that old version of herself, so small, so frightened. "I found you," Richard's voice sounded from the door, pulling her from her thoughts. He approached, noticing the photograph in her hands. "Is everything okay?" Lisa smiled, a genuine smile that now came naturally. "Yes, just reflecting. It's strange to look back and barely recognize who I was." Richard hugged her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder as they observed the photograph together. "You've always been strong, Lisa. You just needed to rediscover that." "We both needed to," she replied, turning in his arms to face him. "Sometimes I wonder if Alexandra brought us together somehow. If this whole path, as painful as it was, wasn't necessary for us to get here." "Maybe," Richard agreed softly, "but the important thing is what we do with this gift now." The sound of animated voices in the corridor interrupted them. It was support group day and the women were beginning to arrive. Lisa was still surprised by how the place had transformed. The once silent corridors now echoed with voices, laughter, and sometimes crying, sounds of healing, of liberation, of new beginnings. "Lisa," a timid voice called from the door. It was Marina, one of the first residents of the shelter, carrying her 3-month-old baby. "Sorry to interrupt, but I needed to show you something." Lisa approached, noticing the special gleam in the young mother's eyes. Marina extended a paper. It was a work card newly signed. "I got the job, the one at the bookstore you told me about." "Oh, Marina." Lisa hugged her carefully, conscious of the baby between them. "I knew you could do it. It's thanks to you," Marina said, tears of joy in her eyes, "for making me believe I could be more than a victim." After Marina left, Lisa turned to Richard, finding him with a proud smile on his face. "What?" she asked. "You," he answered simply. "The way you transformed your pain into something so beautiful, so meaningful." Lisa felt her heart expand with love, not just for him, but for everything they had built together. "We transformed," she corrected. "Every brick in this place has a bit of both of us." Richard approached, taking her hands in his. "Speaking of building together, and there's something I want to ask you." Lisa felt her heart race as she noticed the seriousness in his voice. "What is it?" "These last months, seeing you flourish, seeing how we transformed this place, how we grew together. Lisa, I never thought I would find this kind of love again, a love that heals, that builds, that inspires." He released one of her hands, reaching for something in his pocket, a small blue velvet box. Lisa held her breath. "I'm not asking you to be mine," Richard continued, his voice soft but firm, "because you don't belong to anyone but yourself. I'm asking to build together, to continue this journey side by side, as partners, as equals." Opening the box, he revealed a delicate ring, not a traditional solitaire, but a unique design of two intertwined bands, symbolizing union and independence. "Lisa," he said, his eyes fixed on hers, "would you give me the honor of building a future together? Of transforming more stories of pain into stories of hope?" The tears running down Lisa's face were purely of joy, an emotion she had relearned to feel fully in the last months. "Yes," she replied, her voice trembling with emotion. 1,000 times yes. When Richard slid the ring on her finger, Lisa felt as if a cycle was completing. It wasn't a happy ending from a fairy tale. It was something much more real, much deeper. It was a new beginning built on healed scars, on revealed truths, on love conquered step by step. Mark's trial took place on a spring day, exactly 1 year after his arrest. The courtroom was packed, not only with the press and curious onlookers, but with dozens of women and children whose lives had been affected by his empire of violence and trafficking. Lisa sat between Richard and Sarah, their hands intertwined, forming a chain of strength and mutual support. Sarah, as one of the main lawyers in the case, presented the evidence with surgical precision. Each document, each testimony, each recording built a devastating portrait of decades of systematic crimes. Mark's face, previously so controlled and arrogant, lost color as his empire crumbled before his eyes. When it came time for Lisa to testify, she walked to the witness stand with a dignity that made Richard's heart swell with pride. Her voice didn't tremble once as she detailed the years of abuse, the threats, the use of Sarah as an instrument of blackmail. "Mr. Stevens didn't just physically assault me," she declared, looking directly at the jury. "He tried to destroy my soul, my capacity to love, my connection with my only family. But today I am here not as a victim, but as a survivor. And I am not alone." The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all charges. When the sentence was pronounced, 50 years without possibility of parole, a collective sigh ran through the courtroom. It was the end of an era of terror, the closure of a painful chapter in the lives of countless people. After the session, as they left the courthouse, Lisa was approached by several women. Some she knew from the shelter, others were new faces, but all shared that look of mutual recognition, of deep understanding that only comes from shared experiences. "Your testimony gave me courage," one of them said, squeezing Lisa's hand. "Now I know I can rebuild my life too." On the way back home, Sarah drove while Lisa and Richard sat in the back seat, absorbing the events of the day. The engagement ring shone softly on Lisa's finger, a constant reminder that true love doesn't imprison, it liberates. "You know, what's funny?" Sarah commented, looking through the rearview mirror. "Mark thought he was destroying us, but he ended up uniting us in a way I never imagined possible." Lisa smiled, leaning on Richard's shoulder. "Sometimes the greatest act of rebellion is to be happy despite everything." Arriving at the mansion, now officially the New Beginning Support Center, they were received by a scene that warmed their hearts. The residents had organized a small celebration with cake and coffee. But it wasn't just Mark's sentence they were celebrating. It was something bigger, more significant. Lisa, Richard, Marina approached carrying her baby, who now smiled and babbled happily. "We wanted to show you something." She guided them to the garden, where Mrs. Caroline's old roses had been replaced by a much more significant project, a community garden, where each bed had the name of a survivor. It was a symbol of renewal, of life continuing and flourishing even after trauma. "Each woman who passes through here plants something," Marina explained. It's our way of saying we can create beauty even after the storm. Lisa felt tears streaming down her face as she observed the garden. Richard hugged her from behind, and she could feel that he was also moved. "Let's have our wedding here," she suddenly decided, turning to face him. "Right here, among these plants that symbolize so many new beginnings." "Nothing could be more perfect," Richard agreed, kissing her softly. Sarah discreetly wiped away a tear. "Well, as maid of honor, I demand the right to an emotional speech that will make everyone cry." The laughter that followed was light, genuine, the kind of laughter that only comes when the heart is truly free. Lisa looked around at her recovered sister, her love found in the most unlikely circumstances, and all these women who now were part of her expanded family. Night was gently falling over the garden, and the first stars were beginning to appear. In the sky, Lisa thought about how darkness no longer frightened her, not when there were so many lights around her, not when her heart was so full of love and purpose. The wedding day dawned with a particular softness, as if nature itself wanted to celebrate the love that had blossomed from the ashes of fear. The garden of the New Beginning Support Center was transformed. Arches of wildflowers marked the path to the improvised altar, and each bed in the community garden had been decorated with small lights that awaited dusk to shine. Lisa was getting ready in her old room, now transformed into a welcoming space that in no way resembled the dark days of her past. Sarah was with her, helping with the last details of the dress, a simple but elegant piece that perfectly reflected the woman she had become. "Something tells me Mum and Dad would be proud," Sarah commented, carefully adjusting the veil. "Not just for the wedding, but for everything we've built." Lisa smiled at her sister's reflection in the mirror. "Sometimes I wonder if they somehow guided our path here, if each trial wasn't actually a necessary step to this moment." A gentle knock on the door interrupted the moment. It was Marina, carrying a bouquet of flowers harvested from the community garden. "The residents wanted you to carry a little piece of each of them today," she explained, handing the arrangement to Lisa. The bouquet was an explosion of colors and meanings: white roses for new beginnings, lavender for serenity, daisies for recovered innocence, and in the center, a single purple orchid, the flower that Lisa had helped Marina to plant on her first day at the shelter. "It's perfect," Lisa whispered, moved. Outside guests were beginning to arrive. It wasn't a traditional ceremony. Besides relatives and close friends, many of the women who had passed through the center were present, each carrying her own story of overcoming and renewal. Richard waited at the altar, elegant in his navy blue suit, his eyes shining with a mixture of anxiety and joy. By his side as best man was James, one of the investigators who had helped dismantle Mark's empire and who ended up becoming a close friend and dedicated supporter of the project. When the music began, a soft version of "Somewhere Over the E" Rainbow played by one of the residents on the guitar, Lisa felt her heart race. Sarah gave a last hug to her sister before taking her place as maid of honor. The path to the altar was a moment of deep reflection for Lisa. Each step on the petals scattered on the ground was like reliving a chapter of her journey: the fear, the pain, the discovery of true love, the reconnection with Sarah, the transformation of her trauma into purpose. When she finally reached Richard, their hands met naturally, like two pieces of a puzzle that had always been destined to fit together. "You look stunning," he whispered, his eyes teary. The ceremony was conducted by a judge who had helped in several cases at the center, her words laden with meaning and understanding about the depth of the moment they were living. "The love we celebrate today," she began, "is not just the union of two people, but a testimony of the healing power that exists when we choose to face our shadows together." Lisa and Richard didn't just find each other. They created a beacon of hope for others who are still finding their way in the darkness. The vows were exchanged with voices choked with emotion. Lisa spoke about how Richard had taught her that true love is freedom, not prison. Richard spoke about how Lisa had shown him that sometimes we need to break completely to rebuild ourselves stronger. When the rings were exchanged, the same ones that symbolized union and independence, there wasn't a dry eye in the garden. The kiss that sealed the union was more than a romantic gesture. It was a declaration of victory over fear, a celebration of the possibility of loving fully even after trauma. The reception that followed was a celebration of life and hope. The tables were arranged among the beds of the garden, creating an intimate and meaningful atmosphere. Each centerpiece told the story of a survivor through small objects and photos that symbolized her journey of healing. Sarah rose for her speech, her voice laden with emotion. "When I was a child, Lisa used to tell me stories before bed. Stories about princesses who needed to be saved by princes. But the story we've lived is much more powerful. It's about people who save each other, who transform pain into purpose, who choose love instead of fear." The lights in the garden beds began to shine as the sun set, creating a magical scenario. Lisa and Richard danced their first dance as a couple to the sound of "The Way You Look Tonight," their foreheads touching, their bodies moving in perfect synchrony. 5 years passed since that night of celebration in the garden. The New Beginning Support Center had expanded, now occupying 3 adjacent properties, each dedicated to different aspects of the recovery and social reintegration process. Lisa and Richard had transformed the original mansion into much more than a shelter. It was a true transformation center, where stories of pain were rewritten into narratives of hope. On a particularly significant morning, Lisa was in her office, organizing the preparations for the graduation of the first class of the professional course they had implemented. Among the papers she found an old photo, her and Sarah, still children, smiling without imagining what destiny had in store for them. "Mommy?" A sweet little voice pulled her from her thoughts. Emma, her 4-year-old daughter, entered the office skipping, her dark curls bouncing with each step. "Aunt Sarah is here." Lisa smiled, putting away the photo. Sarah had become a constant presence in their lives, dividing her time between advocacy and volunteer work at the center. Her work with victims of human trafficking had gained international recognition, and she frequently traveled across the country giving lectures and trainings. In the hallway, she found Sarah carrying a stack of documents and a conspiratorial smile. "You won't believe what I discovered," she announced, entering the office and closing the door behind her. "What is it?" "Remember that investigation into Mark's international contacts?" Sarah spread some papers on the desk. "We just identified a similar network operating in Europe. And guess what? Alexandra was investigating the same network before she died." Lisa felt a familiar shiver run down her spine. Even after so long, connections to her past continued to emerge like threads of a complex web that extended far beyond what they had imagined. "Richard needs to know this," she said, picking up her cell phone. "He's already on his way," Sarah replied. "I called him as soon as I confirmed the information." Minutes later, Richard entered the office and Lisa immediately noticed the tension in his shoulders, the same tension that appeared whenever the past threatened to resurface. "Show him," Lisa encouraged Sarah. As Sarah explained her discoveries, Lisa observed her husband attentively. In the past 5 years, they had built a life based on honesty and mutual support. Each new challenge, each revelation from the past was faced together, with the strength that came from a mature and conscious love. "Alexandra was closer to the truth than we imagined," Richard murmured, examining the documents. "She wasn't just investigating Mark. She was unraveling the entire international structure. And now we can finish what she started," Sarah said, her eyes shining with determination. "Use this information to dismantle the rest of the network. Save more lives." Lisa approached Richard, her hands naturally finding his. "What do you want to do?" He looked at her with that same look that had captivated her years ago, a mixture of strength and vulnerability that made their love so special. "I want to do what we've always done, transform pain into purpose." The office door opened again, and Emma came running in, followed by Marina, who now coordinated the center's child education program. "Sorry to interrupt," Marina smiled, "but there are some people wanting to meet the founders of the project that changed their lives." In the hallway, a group of women was waiting. They were the graduates of the professional course, all with different stories but united by the same journey of overcoming. Lisa looked at each face, recognizing in them the same gleam of hope that she had found in her own reflection years ago. Richard gently squeezed her hand, and she knew he was thinking the same thing. Each transformed life was a victory not only over individual trauma, but over the entire system that Mark and his associates had built. Emma ran to her father's arms, who lifted her with ease. "Tell that story again, Daddy, about how you and Mommy met." Richard exchanged a complicit look with Lisa. "How about we tell it together? It's a story about how sometimes we need to face our greatest fears to find our greatest love." Lisa smiled, her heart overflowing with gratitude. Her life had transformed in a way she could never have imagined on that first morning at the Jefferson estate. Fear had given way to courage, loneliness to love, and silence to a symphony of voices that rose together, telling stories of overcoming and hope. Sarah approached, hugging her sister by the shoulders. "You know what I love most about this whole story? That it never really ends. Each new day is a chance to help someone rewrite their own happy ending." Lisa nodded, observing her family, both the one of blood and the one she had chosen along the way. True love, she had learned, wasn't just about romance or passion. It was about choosing hope instead of fear, light instead of darkness, and having the courage to reach out to others who were still finding their way out of the shadows. Richard gently kissed her temple, his eyes fixed on the photograph. It's amazing how places, just like people, can transform when filled with love and purpose. The sound of children's laughter echoed through the garden. Emma played with other children from the center, sons and daughters of women who, like Lisa, had found there not just refuge, but a new beginning. The scene warmed her heart in a special way. "Sometimes I find myself thinking about Alexandra," Lisa confessed, turning another page of the album. "About how her search for truth, even though it ended tragically, ended up bringing us here. As if she had left a map for us to follow." "She would be the first to celebrate what we've built," Richard replied, his voice soft but firm. "Especially now that Sarah is about to expose the rest of the international network. Her work wasn't in vain." Lisa gently closed the album, turning to face her husband. "You know what moves me the most? Seeing how each story that passes through here is unique, but they all share something in common, the discovery that we are stronger than we imagined." At that moment, Sarah appeared on the porch carrying her document folder and a radiant smile. "Am I interrupting something?" "Never," Lisa smiled, making room for her sister to join them. "How was the meeting with the International Task Force?" "Better than we expected," Sarah replied, her eyes shining with that familiar determination. "The evidence Alexandra left combined with everything we discovered through Mark, we're about to dismantle the entire operation. 3 continents, dozens of people involved." Richard nodded thoughtfully. "And Mark?" "Still in prison, where he'll remain for the rest of his life. But he made a deal. He's providing information in exchange for some privileges. Typical of him, always negotiating." Lisa felt a slight tremor upon hearing her ex-husband's name, but it was no longer fear. It was the awareness of how much she had grown, of how the man who once terrified her was now just a distant shadow. In her story, Emma ran to them, her little curls dancing in the wind. "Mommy, Daddy, Aunt Sarah, come see. The flowers we planted are starting to open." The 3 followed the little girl to the community garden, where small buds were beginning to bloom in the beds. It was a different garden now. Each plant had a story, each flower represented a life in transformation. "This is how healing happens, isn't it?" Lisa reflected aloud, watching her daughter animatedly explain the meaning of each flower to Sarah. "Gradually, like these flowers, one day you realize that you not only survived, but flourished." Richard hugged her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "And the most beautiful thing is that each flower that blooms here inspires others to grow as well." The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Lisa observed the women of the center gathering for the evening support group, each carrying her own story of overcoming. She saw Marina, now coordinator of the educational program, guiding a new resident. She observed her husband, her sister, and her daughter, her family rebuilt from the ashes of the past. "You know what I've learned over all these years?" she said, her voice laden with emotion. That true love isn't just about finding the right person. It's about becoming the truest version of ourselves alongside someone who inspires us to grow. Richard turned her in his arms, his eyes meeting, hers with that same intensity that had captivated her years ago. And you, Lisa, have inspired me to be a better person from the very first moment. The kiss they shared there under the sunset sky, surrounded by the garden that symbolized so many stories of rebirth, was more than a demonstration of love. It was a celebration of all the battles won, all the fears overcome, all the lives transformed. Emma ran back to them, throwing herself into her parents' arms. Sarah joined the collective hug, and for a moment time seemed to stop. There they were, not just a family, but a living testimony that love, when true and nurtured with courage and purpose, has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. The savior lights of the center began to turn on one by one, like earthly stars guiding the way for those still seeking their new beginning. And Lisa knew with a certainty that came from the deepest part of her soul that her story, her journey from fear to love, from survival to flourishing, would continue to inspire others to find their own light in the shadows. Because sometimes, the greatest loves are born precisely in the most unlikely places, and the most beautiful stories are those written by hearts that, even when wounded, never lost the ability to believe in the possibility of a new dawn.